Hello, welcome to Birth of a New Dimension. My name is Aurora, I am your host. I'm also a walk-in and I'm a galactic walk-in. And for those of you who are new to the broadcast or new to the concept of what a walk-in is, it's the term to describe a consciousness who is not the original inhabitant of the physical body. I call myself or describe myself as a galactic walk-in, as opposed to in order to differentiate my consciousness or the origins of my consciousness from another person who is a human on Earth. So, all of this is relevant because today I'm going to be making much more clear delineations in the terms that I use. I often speak about Earth, surface, human culture, and there's a reason for that. We are actually submerged within an enormous panoply of culture, both Earth-based and non-terrestrial, non-Earth-based, and extra-dimensional. So first, I need to describe my own origins of my consciousness. My consciousness is stellar in its origins. That means that I primarily come from the stars, and not one particular star, but I am a part of a floating collective, an amalgamation or a mixture of a variety of many species or space races and origins of consciousness. So first of all, all consciousness that exists here, including you and plant and mineral life and everything that exists, are all emanations of the primary unity consciousness. This would be described as source or the great emanator, the origin of all consciousness. And in exactly the same way that white light is comprised of the wavelengths of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And when you combine all of those wavelengths in their appropriate color recipe, you get white light. Well, this is the same exact description of unity consciousness. When it is in unity and coherent, it would be analogous to white light. And when it is refracted into its various characteristics or wavelengths or tones or colors, we then experience that unity consciousness split up into diversity. And each star is an emanator of unity consciousness, but it has its own particular color recipe. So for example, Sol, our nearest star, is mostly yellow-green, yellow light verging towards green. And every star has its own particular unique characteristics. Some might be more blue, some might be more red. And then the life forms that are emanated by each star have their own set of characteristics too. All right? So this is all set up, this is all backstory to understand that, first of all, your particular life, incarnation, and experience is a refinery of consciousness. And the Earth experience of all life on Earth, refining consciousness, is again a refinery of consciousness. And the galactic experience of unity consciousness being broken up into its constituent elements and manifesting in the physical realm in order to interact with other parts of itself and then return to a state of coherence and unity, is the refinery of consciousness on the galactic level. So I'm speaking about the physical realm being, like I call it, the sandbox. Like at school, all of the kids play in the sandbox. And the physical realm is the stage upon which all forces, particles, and consciousness are able to meet and interact and explore one another. This is what this is all about. And why am I speaking about this today? Because I am going to be speaking about inner earth, or Agartha. This is a mythological realm that is not so mythological, but first we must understand origins of consciousness and the variety of characteristics, and we're going to have, quote unquote, the talk. So in much the same way that human parents at a certain point have to speak with their offspring about sexuality as it becomes more relevant to their children's development when they get to the right age, so too is it at a certain point necessary for me to speak to humanity about galactic origins, or the origins of life, human life on Earth and human consciousness, in order to be able to go any further with this conversation or discussion. And I often couch my language and don't speak openly about this because I teach lessons for full spectrum humans, and I save this information for lesson 18 of a 20 lesson course, preparing people, preparing the consciousness, so that when you find out about where human life came from and why humans are facing these consciousness challenges, it will not be psychologically devastating. However, in order for us to move forward in this conversation right here, we need to speak about this. So prepare yourself, and I'd like to speak about how humanity was incepted and who incepted humans. And really, I've spoken about this often, alluded to the fall of Atlantis. And so when I speak about Agartha, I'm also really speaking about Atlantis. And I will be speaking about some of my own experiences there. And also, it's a beautiful sunny day, and I go and recharge my inner psychic batteries with direct solar consciousness. And I wish that I could record this just sitting outside in my backyard in the sunshine. This can be a dark topic, so I do not wish to overwhelm or to diminish your frequency of unconditional love. So in order to positively ingest these nutrients, you need to be running your energetic metabolism at a high rate of unconditional love. That gives you the proper perspective to be able to accept unconditionally and without judgment this information. So maintain the stance of unconditional love as we begin to speak about these concepts. First, when I speak about and refer to the fall of Atlantis, Atlantis was a sophisticated, ancient, worldwide, when I say worldwide, I mean planetary, spanning the surface of Earth, the planet, and galactic culture, was a sophisticated culture. So here in this time and place, a culture is considered sophisticated if it has phone service, like the internet, television and mass media and movies, and if it has trade and shares knowledge and concepts and cultural concepts with the rest of the planet. So, for example, New York City is connected to the rest of the world culturally and is considered to be a cultural hub. Now let's contrast that with, a very out-of-the-way place like a village in rural Mexico. So both of these places, New York and the rural village, are on the surface of the same planet, but the qualitative experience of those inhabitants is very different. The village might have trade with other local villages. They might have television, they might not. They might have access to cable TV, they might not. So they might be seeing a few local news broadcasts. They might see some movies that make it to their local movie theater, but not all movies. And in terms of broadcasting culturally, a small rural village in Mexico has almost no voice. Like there are very few movie studios or television studios located in small rural Mexican villages, so they are not necessarily producing content and sharing their perspective with the rest of the world. as opposed to New York City, which has a thriving theater and media industry and shares its viewpoint through making music, literature, artwork, and all of the basically television and movies, the ways that people share information in this time and place. So all of this is set up to understand that Atlantis was analogous to New York City. It was culturally connected, and not just to the rest of the planetary structure, and not just to our nearest planetary brethren within this star system, within the solar system. Atlantis was connected to galactic civilization, and that encompasses not only distant planets or distant places in space-time, but also different times or dimensions. And now we have to get into a more sophisticated mental understanding and do yoga of the perception so that we can understand that there are some places that you cannot fly to, in an airplane, or that you cannot drive to in a physical car. There are some places that you can only get to with a non-physical vehicle, something like a Merkaba meaning light body vessel, or a vessel of pure consciousness. If you have ever had a psychedelic journey, if you've ever ingested ayahuasca or taken magic mushrooms, psilocybe cubensis, or ingested peyote, then you probably have experienced a non-physical vehicle for travel, or if you have gone into deep aspects of consciousness cultivation, meditation, gone into binaural beats and the theta and gamma waves, if you have done any of that work, then you have been cultivating your non-physical vehicle for travel. And you use that vehicle to go to non-physical places. So this is an important distinction to make, and you'll get that in the theme of this hour. Because Agartha, or inner earth, all aka Shambhala or Shangri-La, this is not a place that you can get to with your physical vehicle, like if you had an earth digger, the type that is used to create, like the channel tunnel that goes across the English Channel. Even if you had an earth digger of that magnitude, that is not how you would get to Agartha. You get there through interdimensional portals, and you have to have the right wavelength and frequency of consciousness in order to go through those portals. So some doors you need a physical key to unlock the key and make the tumblers of the lock move. Some doors are like a vibrating field, which you cannot enter unless you are vibrating at the right frequency. And I've spoken many times about the necessity of being able to learn to make the tone of unconditional love, like, ah, that is a tone. Your non-physical body, your light body, also sings with energy. You create a tone all the time. And the uncontrolled energetic tones that most people are creating are unpleasant. It is analogous to people who are hearing impaired and cannot hear themselves and they're singing. It would be considered cacophonous or not harmonious. And I've mentioned before that Sasquatch or Yeti stays away from most urban human centers because of the cacophonous screeching, the emanations of those who do not perceive what they themselves are emanating. Why do I bring up Sasquatch or Yeti? Beyond the fact that they are a beautiful culture and a beautiful world of creatures and very friendly, they have a connection to Agartha or inner earth. And I need to get to the origins of where Agartha comes from. One moment, please. So first of all, Agartha is a world that runs on inner light. And when I sit in meditation and ingest sunlight, I am ingesting more than merely the physical light presence that can be measured by science. I'm ingesting more than merely infrared wavelengths that warm my skin, and more than the UVA and UVB, higher frequency wavelengths that affect my pineal gland, cause a production of melanin in my skin and melatonin from my pineal gland. So all of these are physiological, biological responses to the sunlight. But I am also ingesting the subtle consciousness that comes from the sun. And, when I used to live in a dark place in the wintertime, I had a light that mimicked the full frequency, full spectrum, light that is emitted from the sun. And I used to sit in front of that in order to try to fool my biology and feel more wakeful and happy in the dark times. And I found that it was like ersatz, or in other times when I went to a tanning booth, ersatz, food that is not really food, like margarine instead of butter. Although it stimulated my skin cells and warmed my body, it did not have solar consciousness. It was not like having a conversation with the sun, which is what my daily sun gazing practice is like. When I sun gaze, I have ideas. I connect with the consciousness being that is the sun. It is the origin of my artwork and the inspiration for these radio broadcasts. So, for example, over the past several days, as I've been in the sun, I've been learning about Agartha, and I've been interacting more and more with the Agarthans, and the topics and the motivation to share with others comes from ingesting solar consciousness. So the consciousness that comes from the sun is inner light. And this is the type of light, or psychic light, that runs the inner world of Agartha, or inner earth. Inner earth is not a place that you can get to by bulldozing through the crust of the earth. It is a place that you can get to through certain energetic portals. And in order to get there, you need to raise the vibration of your consciousness. My boss just showed up. This is Miss Ashley, my boss, right over here. So according to myth, and myth often is a remembering, a hazy remembering of things that were truthful events in reality. Like Atlantis is remembered as a mythological time and place. However, it is the amnesiac or hazy remembering of an actual worldwide culture that was largely edited, that the evidences of that culture were largely wiped away, not only due to geological cataclysm, but due to cultural cleansing. And that is why we're getting to the galactic history story. Like when you have to talk to people about sex and you have to just say, this is what is going on here. We have to have this conversation about galactic history. And we have to have the conversation about the origins of Agartha. So, in Atlantis, there were many eras, just like we now know of, ancient Egypt. There were many different eras or kingdoms during that time. And in Atlantis, there were some very high eras of incredible sophistication. And then there were eras where consciousness degraded and where human consciousness was enslaved. First, let's talk about the pristine eras before consciousness was enslaved, what it was like to live. So I've spoken about this before, but we all learn through repetition, so there's a value to saying this again. That our bodies were not created to grow old, grow decrepit, and die within a mere 100 years. And they were not meant, the idea that your body within like the first 20 years would go from a state of total vitality, in early childhood, to a state of mild decrepitude in one's 20s is unimaginable. And yet that is considered to be quite normal in this time and place. in this time and place, people consider it normal that when you're a tiny child, you have tons of energy and you run around and you can run, like a little goat, run and prance. And then as you get only slightly older, that it becomes harder and harder to run and you have less energy until, most people in their 20s don't necessarily feel like jumping up first thing in the morning without coffee and, going out and running a 10-mile, practice for a marathon. That's considered rare. That is considered, for athletes and people who really cultivate their bodies. And that most people, by the time they're in their 20s, have been conditioned to learn to sit behind a desk and not use their physical bodies very much during their day. Anyway, that is a cultural aberration, and the biological programming from modeling your expectations on other people is totally false. And this cultural conditioning and biological modeling happens because you're living in a realm and at a time when what humanity is by its very nature has been diminished. So you see very few examples of real humans. There are, of course, examples of humans who have cultivated their bodies very well, and these are considered, rare beings like athletes or Olympians or bodybuilders. So when I begin to speak about, your true form of your body, I want you to begin envisioning your true form to be like that of an Olympian. And that's a good word, too, because this comes culturally from ancient Greece. The Olympians were heroes. They were gods who lived on Mount Olympus. And when I say heroes, I'm using the actual Greek connotation of that word of being a conduit or an avatar or a container for consciousness that is from higher dimensional realms. The Greek heroes were physical containers for higher dimensional creatures. Olympians. And so to envision yourself as an Olympian physically, we all have within us this potential, and it is largely going uncultivated, and that is intentional. So I also, when we have the talk here today, I'm going to be telling you more and more, just as I tell you that your mind, the mind that is called the human mind and used by humans in human culture, does not originate with humanity, and it has been foisted upon you or perpetrated against you in order to keep you diminished. Let's talk about who and what humans were like before you were genetically diminished. This is what the culture of Atlantis was. It was a culture of people who lived in an undiminished state. That means, first of all, their bodies were 100% vital. You get a vital body by being connected psychically to higher consciousness. This is information that is currently understood as truth from masters of the Far East, like yogis and practitioners of meditation. And the reason why there are many of them from the Hindu culture and the culture of Buddhism in the Far East is because those two cultures have kept alive some of the ancient traditions of Atlantis. When Atlantis, the culture, fell and was dispersed across the surface of Earth, various aspects of the esoteric teachings were kept alive, and so even the understanding of inner light, the prana is the Hindu word for it, or the Indian from the subcontinent of India word for it, and chi is the word from the Far East, the area of China. This non-physical energy, even maintaining a cultural awareness of it by having a word for it, is crucial. In Atlantis, everyone was psychically adept. In this time and place, almost no one is psychically adept. Very few people have activated pineal glands in the time and place that I'm speaking to you from. Most people have diminished mental capacities. So a person who has a activated pineal gland, they are telepathic. They're sometimes telekinetic. I mean, in this time and place, those aspects of consciousness would be considered superpowers. Those were normal aspects of consciousness in Atlantis. So communication was handled with very minimal flapping of the mouth parts. I always laugh and joke about how much mouth part flapping I have to do in order to communicate ideas in this time and place. And that's because people around here, they can't hear mostly when I just speak with my mind. And so we have to utilize the tools that have been up until this point been oppressing humanity, and that is conscious verbalized thought. So the hacked operating system that is your human quote-unquote mind contains language, and language that doesn't turn off. You don't have an off button for the little voice that's constantly chattering away and speaking in your mind. And even being able to understand the necessity of inner silence is one of these keys to consciousness upliftment that has been kept alive by certain cultures. So the native people of South and Central America knew about the implanted mind and the constant verbalization and speech taking one away from true consciousness. Constant verbalization, these are some of the bars on the cage of your consciousness that as a tiny child, you learn to speak and you learn to understand language as a necessary aspect of surviving within a culture that requires you to speak and understand language. But now I'm going to get you to understand that the culture on Earth's surface was not created by humans and for human upliftment. And I'm going to begin to use the word satanic, and I want to define terms before I begin to use them. So, there are many different space races or different species of consciousness in different consciousness containers throughout all of the different galaxies. We have unity consciousness split into its various constituent elements, like rays being split from sunshine, and these different elements have different characteristics. In the galaxy, there are all sorts of different contexts or environments, and you need certain characteristics to survive certain environments. So if you come from a very difficult to survive world or environment, developing certain characteristics of aggression and tenacity are important. However, some of these characteristics have become distorted in the amount that they are present. So like I say, in a recipe, when you are making a cake, you want to make sure that you put in the right amount of all ingredients. 1 teaspoon of salt is the appropriate amount of recipe to make cake. 1 cup of salt is the appropriate recipe to make inedible poison. So in our galaxy, it is necessary to have a tiny little sprinkling of certain personality characteristics, like the characteristic of going away from light, going away from consciousness, going away from organization, going away from intelligence. Entropy, this is like the loss of energy. So, and we don't cast aspersions, we don't make judgments. When you make a judgment, it's like saying that thing shouldn't exist. It should exist, but it might only exist in tiny, minute quantities in the recipe or proportions of the universe. So some of these personality characteristics of the galaxy have run rampant. They are too exacerbated, and they have overshadowed some of the other personality characteristics. So there are personality characteristics at large in the world that are those of being receptive and being sensitive. And those characteristics develop within certain contexts. So if you're always in a kill or be killed, fight for survival world, where there's barely enough energy to survive, and it is considered to be a sign of weakness to share anything with anyone else, and where, any amount of flab or slack is immediately, taken up. There's no quarter asked and no quarter given. I'm trying to describe, like, if you know anything about ancient Sparta and some of the ideals that were embraced, or if you know anything about Ayn Rand, these cultural ideals of extreme self-sufficiency, that would be the concepts and the behavior patterns that are developed by beings that come from these extremely difficult realms where you cannot be soft and accommodating and survive. And consciousness deserves to survive. However, if you took one of these consciousnesses that comes from a very barbaric world where it's kill or be killed, and you bring them to a different world that's much more sensitive, that's based more on aesthetics, social and energetic and emotional sensitivity, and being able to be empathetic. If you can envision a culture where not only is it not aggressive, but where what is rewarded, the characteristics that are rewarded are those of being loving, sensitive, and accommodating towards others. This is almost unimaginable to people in this time and place that come out of this level of cultural programming. But if we use a myth from the Hopis, it might give you an idea of what this culture would be like. So in this myth from the Hopis, there were deities that were offering corn to all of the different tribes that existed, and some of the tribes chose the most beautifully shaped ears of corn that were fat and giant and had big kernels. And the Hopi chose what we know as Indian corn, small ears of very tiny kernels that aren't big and juicy and yellow, but that had different colors. And the deities rewarded the Hopi for choosing the smallest and hardest to grow ears of corn. They were given extra special, let's say, cultural provisions because they demonstrated in their value system that they're not all about me, and biggest for me, best for me. They demonstrated sensitivity to others and the knowledge that they operate within a context. This is also like saying that we would reward a tiny child if we put out a platter of food and all the other children raced to get the biggest food first, and then the kid that didn't race for the food got the little crumbs. Would you allow that kid to go hungry? Of course not. We'd say, we're going to give you an extra special cupcake because we see that you accommodated the other children and didn't rush everything for yourself. Well, there are space races or cultures where those are the values that are promoted and embraced. The values of cooperation as opposed to competition, working together. Because imagine this, imagine if you were in a cooperative society and you had a child or a newcomer that came there that exhibited tendencies that were of all for me, you would understand that that would be a threat to your cooperative society. That person would not be happy to work within the context of, having to accommodate others. So, of course, those behaviors would not be encouraged within that context. These are real stories about real places that are not on Earth. These real cultures have arisen, and they are first of all, many, many years in advance of Earth culture. They've been around for a long time. So I also use the analogy that they are like second graders. If Earth human surface culture is like kindergartners or first graders, these would be like second graders or fourth graders. They're not college professors. They're only slightly more advanced than Earth surface human culture. And these other space races have developed the technology to interact with beings far away, yet they don't necessarily have the inner wisdom and the value system that says that they should be allowed to interact with races far away. So some of these races that are about service to self and the fight for survival, they destroyed their environment. And you can understand that that behavior would come out of that value system. It's not sustainable if you take all resources for yourself and never care about your context. It's kind of similar to what Earth's surface human culture is doing right now, where humans are taking the resources that they need at the expense of the overall health of the planet. And if they continue to do that, then it will no longer be a planet that will support them. This is exactly what happened to other races in other times, in other places. So far different times and places, those beings acted very poorly towards the structure that supports their life and their world. And then they had to look elsewhere to get the resources that they needed. And the elsewhere ended up being here. This is all a story about kicking the can down the road. This is when you avert your near-term disasters but create far-term disasters. So these space races that didn't have what they needed to sustain themselves anymore because of their own poor practices that are not sustainable came to other star systems and began to control and dominate the consciousness in those other star systems and take what they wanted. And the justification was always, it's a free will universe, and might makes right, and do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Like, these are distortions of cosmic laws. Cosmic laws are like the laws of physics. They are incontrovertible. If I pick up a bowling ball and I drop it, it doesn't go to court and argue with the laws of physics. It simply obeys. And the overarching laws of the cosmos are similar to the laws of physics. They are energetic laws. They're laws that are about truth. Things like 1 + 1 makes 2. If I tell you 1 + 1 makes 3 or makes 1/2, that's against the law. And something that's against the law is like a ship or a vessel that is built very poorly and has a leaky structure. You can tell if a thought system is against cosmic laws if we submerge it, if we put it out to sea, if we see if it can float. If it has a leaky structure, then that is not a truthful value system. So a lot of these space races that are heavily distorted take one aspect of truth and they conveniently use it to their advantage and conveniently ignore other aspects of truth. So it's kind of like if we say, it's a free will universe. That is a fact. That's an aspect of truth. But to use that as a justification to impose your will on someone else and take away their free will is clearly a distortion and a perversion of that concept. So this is all, when we get into this, it's legalese. It is like cosmic legalese, and I'm like a cosmic lawyer. You have to use logic and have a thought structure to make your case. But you make your case by having a thought structure that is in divine alignment. It's like saying, my triangle actually has 60-degree angles, and that's why it's really a triangle. Your triangle has 58-degree angles, and your angles don't add up to 180 degrees, and that's why you don't really have a triangle. So these space races that try to justify their oppression of other consciousnesses and other species by saying it's a free will universe are very selectively applying their understanding of the laws of the cosmos in order to do what they want. And their triangles don't add up to 180 degrees. So that is also why I am here, in order to share this information and bring insight into your position, because your position is one of being oppressed since birth. You have been born as a slave into a slave species, and you have been oppressed by these beings that use as their justification that it's a free will universe and it's okay for them to take away your free will. Okay? So what happened was, these beings that needed more resources, is a kind way of putting it, they created a culture on Marduk, which is now known as the asteroid belt. It went badly, as you can see by the levels of destruction. That planet was destroyed. And those beings, they did not occupy physical corporeal vessels, as I do, and most of you listening do too. Organic, physical, cellular bodies, because in order to create a physical, organic, cellular body, it needs to be grown and conceived of in love. And these beings from the space cultures that are so oppressive, they have gotten to the point where they are really cut off from unity consciousness and unconditional love. If they were loving at all, they would not be able to continue to perform the actions that they do, and they would have a very different values system. So they are not loving, and they cannot procreate and eat in the way that living, loving beings do. They require the food or the essence that is harvested from organic living beings. So these beings, they created a type of mainframe or a type of container for consciousness that would be a physical container for their non-physical consciousness. And they did this on Mars, and we're talking in antiquity. This is, more than 10,000 years ago. And they desired to create an artificial portal, or Merkaba, in order to return to higher dimensional, less dense realms of source consciousness. Ordinarily, a Merkaba is created through unconditional love. They wanted to do it not through unconditional love, so it was done through artificial energy, and this destabilized their entire planet, and that made their mainframe no longer a suitable container for consciousness. So now you have these beings that are more analogous to viruses than to living beings. Viruses, according to the definitions of science, are not really alive. Although they have a cellular structure, they cannot eat or procreate without a host. And these beings that I'm talking about had at this point separated themselves from love and divine consciousness so much that they didn't have a physical form, couldn't eat love, and could not procreate, and they needed some place to live. They looked to Earth culture as their place to live. Earth at that point was analogous to New York City, a sophisticated, glamorous culture that is connected to the hyperspace realm. That means that there was commerce. There was trade of both ideas and energy and substances from Earth to other places. There were performances. There were everything that is now, and things that you couldn't possibly imagine, were cultivated. And people at that time, since they did not have to struggle for their daily subsistence in terms of making food to eat, because at that time people ate pure light. I hope that you are understanding this. This is before the genetic degradation. Your body was meant to act and behave differently. You were intended to ingest pure light, direct solar consciousness through your third eye. You were never intended to have to use plants and chlorophyll as an intermediary to catch sunlight and turn it into sugars and starches that you could eat. And never, never, never were you intended to have to eat animals who could catch, eat plants that caught sunlight so that you could be subsist and be nourished. The capacity to eat animals was developed, after the fall of Atlantis because it was not an agrarian society. Agriculture was not yet developed, and it was really like being plunged into utter darkness. So yeah, you had to eat whatever was on the hoof or whatever was in existence. But before that time, the idea of eating an animal was like cannibalism because all beings were telepathic. So we spoke with all the other animals. We spoke with the birds, and we spoke with the fish, and we spoke with the land animals, and they were our friends. So in Atlantis, like if we needed something big, lifted and carried, we asked an elephant to do it. And they did it because they were our friend. It was not a question of a master and slave type of setup. And it was not necessary to kill or eat an animal. It wasn't even necessary to farm and cultivate plants in the way that we currently do, because we were able to eat consciousness directly. And because of that, humans were able to focus their energies on much higher things, on much finer and sophisticated things. Like I say, performances and nourishing other people, and the type of nourishment that happened was direct neurological stimulation. So it's not just like, oh, I sat in the sunlight and ingested light and then I felt full. It could be someone else sat in the sunlight, ingested sunlight, created a psychic mental program of a divine experience of, ingesting something that tasted good, and then sent that program to my mind, and I ingested that program, and it felt like I was drinking the most wonderful elixir of life, and it came from the sun. This is the type of food and performance that was created in that realm. Now, cue the barbaric invasion. Cue the invasion of consciousness, when the beings that disrupted their world on Mars had no place else to go. They came to Earth and disrupted the genetic code of the people that lived here. They literally created disease. They literally created language and the degraded mental structure that you presently experience. It's not a very pleasant conversation, right? Not a very pleasant realization to understand that, first of all, the worst has already happened. Earth has already been invaded. If you are afraid of a movie like Independence Day, that slavering aliens will come and invade your world and oppress you, it has already happened. And the slavering aliens were ones that were from a culture of aggression and kill or be killed, and no quarter asked and no quarter given. And they came to a world that was an outpost of divine galactic culture that is in tune with the higher vibrational emanations and consciousness and value system of higher dimensional, less dense realms. And the invading force cut off the beings who lived here from being able to speak with and interact with the rest of galactic culture. And this has been the experience for a very long time, about the past 12,000 years. I give a rough 10 to 15,000 years as the rough time frame for this. I'm getting there. Aurora, what does all this have to do with Agartha? So Agartha, inner Earth, this is like the last cultural outpost of Atlantis. There were beings in Atlantis who sensed and knew what was happening, and they created this outpost. It is like a parallel realm. It is not a place you can get to by digging with shovels or bulldozers. I liken this to if you've ever visited a city like Los Angeles. There's the city streets and then there's the freeway. And you can pretty much get to anywhere you need to go only by using the freeway. Oh, the city streets are for chumps. And it's a completely different vibration. It's a completely different world or realm. This is the same with Agartha, or inner earth. Now you understand the distinction that I make between earth surface human culture and there are other humans that live on earth, but they're not humans that look like you or I. They are humans who have been preserved. They are culturally preserved from the time of Atlantis. They're unbelievably beautiful. Each one of them we would classify as beautiful as a model or as fit as an athlete. They are all ascended masters, essentially. They have all cultivated their psychic faculties to the point where they do not die by hitting the membrane of death. They die by consciously ascending from this reality and entering into a higher dimensional, less dense realm. They do not experience disease. Their chakras are all in perfect alignment. They ingest psychic light as their pure form of nourishment. Although I'm told that now some of them also ingest like physical food, that they have like indoor hydroponics. But don't get literal when I talk about Agartha, or there are cities that coincide with some mountains that you can see in the physical realm. So Shambhala or Shangri-La, this coincides with a mountain in the Himalayas. Mount Shasta is the physical representation of the city of Telos. But you don't get to Telos by going to Mount Shasta and digging with the shovel until you get inside of the mountain. Do not be literal. You get to Telos by tuning in to the vibratory rate of its inhabitants. So these cities are shielded from the lower vibrational service to self negative entities that came as thought invaders at the fall of Atlantis. The Atlanteans who saved themselves, or who were saved, they knew that these invaders needed to shield themselves from these invaders. So they set up grids or bubbles within which they would be shielded, and these are seen almost like bubbles of light that encompass the mountains that are associated with these cities. And the reason why you cannot enter into them is that you have to have the right vibratory rate. You have to be singing the right song with your chakras. And most people in this time and place are genetically incapable of singing the right song. You're vibrating out of tune, and you cannot get into that world. And the beings of that world are keeping themselves safe from Earth surface culture. They asked me to speak a little bit about what their culture is like and to characterize it, because you can't even imagine it. It is like brethren is the best word I can use, but in this time and place, many people have negative associations with their family members, because within a person's family, you might experience the genetic blending of various different star cultures, some of whom are empathetic and beautiful, and some of whom are service to self, lower vibration, and satanic. And when we use the word Satan, when I use that word Satan, I am referring to a particular value system of a particular space race. Now we understand that a lot of the religions that have been perpetrated upon humanity have been done so in order to cultivate human culture, to harvest your consciousness, so that you are not praying to the true divine consciousness. You are not praying to true unity consciousness. You are praying to a sub-deity that is not true unity consciousness, and that is taking your emanations and using it as a type of food to feed its own consciousness so that it can maintain its own existence. And that has been going on for the past 10 or 12,000 years. Humans were literally plunged down into a state of darkness. And I say what happened was, and my experience was, it was a cutting of the puppet strings. The puppet masters literally were controlling humanity's thought structure to the point where you could not even think a thought like, I am a slave. And that not only degraded the emanations of Earth, the planet, because Earth is an artist, creating beautiful artworks of mentality. And the artworks that began to be created were of much lower vibration. And Earth has been keeping alive and keeping vibrant the culture of inner Earth, like in order to keep these ideas alive, to keep this frequency alive, so that hopefully this is the goal for Earth's surface culture to return to or re-embrace these values of non-competition, cooperation over competition, artistic expression, sovereignty, freedom, and the idea that life is about way more than a mere scratch for survival, than scrabbling in the dirt trying to get enough calories to eat each day and to oppress others before they oppress you. All of that is the programming of the oppressor culture. All of that has been programmed into the genetic code in order to prevent you from achieving your true levels of intelligence. And the human breeding program has been maintained in order to maintain limited intelligence. So it's like saying you are like dogs. You have been selectively bred for certain characteristics away from your true background, which is that of a wolf. You're actually meant to be a wolf. And that's what the Agarthans and Atlanteans are and were, and what we shall return to. If we just let dogs loose and stopped intervening as humans and selectively breeding them, eventually they would all breed themselves back to wolves. They wouldn't be like little tiny chihuahuas anymore. That is an aberration. They would return to their true form. Same thing with humans. If humans were no longer being impacted upon negatively by these lower vibrational service to self entities, humans would eventually breed back to superintelligence. So we're going to have to end on that note, but we'll speak about it more in upcoming editions of Birth of a New Dimension, because we are doing yoga of the perception to prepare for birth. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you.